Good morning. In case we haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Jonathan Gressett. I work here at Pioneer Drive as one of our ministers. It has been a very exciting week in our lives as a family and in the life of our church family. This week we have made a little bit of a change, and today I'm working with our family ministry, but starting tomorrow I will have the opportunity to be the pastor to our students, and I am absolutely thrilled for that position, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you. Thrilled to be here with you this morning, and we're glad that you have joined us at the 10:30 gathering here. And those online, we are glad that you have tuned in for the 10:30 gathering this morning. You know, I was telling the prayer meeting on Wednesday night, I said, it's a good thing when you get to work with people that you can tolerate. It's kind of a necessity. It's a great thing when you get to work with your friends, and you get to have fun, and you get to know each other a little bit deeper. But it truly is a gift when you get to work in a place with people that you love, and in a place that you love. And I love this church, and I'm thankful for the role that it has played in my life, and I'm extremely thrilled for me and Phoebe and for our family to continue to serve along the wonderful family of Pioneer Drive. And so this morning we are excited to be here, and we are so thankful for that love that is shared and that abounds at Pioneer Drive. But even greater than the love that is present and that abounds at Pioneer Drive is the love of God that we're going to read about today. And we are so thankful that through his son Jesus and his sacrifice that we're able to be together in a room like this morning and share in his word and in his truth in Scripture. And I'm excited about where we are going to be this morning in Scripture, in the book of Esther. Whenever Daniel kind of talked to me about preaching, we had gone through a few different ideas and stories that I might want to preach. And Esther was not on my radar, but after revisiting Esther and going behind the scenes like we're going to continue to do today, as we have with some of the most familiar Bible stories in our lives, or maybe some that we have heard as children and that we're kind of diving deeper into, really realized that as you go behind the scenes in Esther, it is a great behind the scenes book. And the plot twists and the turns that take place in the book of Esther, man, they are better than, as good as Top Gun Maverick is, they are better than even the best Tom Cruise movie with the twists and the turns. And it is very clear to see how God is at work in and through his people in the book of Esther. So that's where we will be this morning, is in the book of Esther. We're going to start in the book of Esther in chapter 3 here in just a moment. But before we do, to give you just a little bit of background, Esther begins with a banquet. King Xerxes is the king in Persia in the 5th century, and King Xerxes, he throws this like crazy party, not just a birthday party where you show up, sing happy birthday, eat cake, maybe eat a little snack, go home, get your presents. He throws a party that lasts somewhere around 187 days. So the people of Persia, they are getting down for the better part of 6 months, and they are, they're partying. And it talks about the splendor of this party and the majesty of this party and how he goes all out and he provides the best things for his people, and that they are really, really partying. And close to the end of this party, he decides, man, I really want my Queen Vashti, to come and be in front of the people. And so he sends his eunuchs, as one would, to go summon his queen. And he invites Queen Vashti to come and be in front of his people, to show her beauty and to be in front of the kingdom and to be recognized in that way. And Queen Vashti says no. And that makes King Xerxes incredibly mad. Can you imagine that in 5th century Persia, that a husband and wife arguing would set off a whole series of issues? Kind of similar, even as different as it is in Persia to today, that a husband and a wife arguing might end up like that. But as logical as he is, he decides to go to his wise counsel, and as one's wise counsel would decide, the best way to handle this is to get rid of Queen Vashti, and to just, hold a beauty pageant, as one would, to find a new wife and to summon all of the pretty ladies in the land and to decide, hey, who's going to be my new queen? So that is what King Xerxes decides. After months of partying, getting mad at his wife, he decides to hold a beauty pageant and to find a new wife. And this is where our key characters now enter in. Esther and Mordecai are two Jewish people that are living in Persia. After the Babylonian exile, a lot of the Jews returned back to Jerusalem, but in Esther we read about this community of Jews that have made a community here in Persia. And so Esther, being a Jewish woman in Persia, a little bit of a minority in that sense, and a lot of it in the sense that she is a woman, a Jewish woman in Persia. For her to enter into this is kind of the first step of courage, but she gets encouragement from what appears to be her father figure, but is actually not her father figure, or not her father. It is her cousin Mordecai, who does serve as a father figure ultimately in the book of Esther. Mordecai is Esther's cousin, and we learn that Esther's parents have died, and Mordecai has invited Esther into his family. So a family dynamic that may be a little bit different, and they are definitely not the Persian people that everybody else around them is. They are Jewish people in a foreign land, and Esther, in a bold step of confidence, decides that she is going to enter into this beauty pageant. And in this beauty pageant, surely enough, the King Xerxes, finds her to be desirable, and he elevates her to the position as queen. And a part of that move to her position and elevation as queen is that Mordecai kind of comes along for the ride, and we're going to hear from Mordecai and his voice of wisdom and his voice of reason to start. But the plot twists in this book start early. And that first plot twist is that she's a Jewish woman, and her fatherly figure is a Jewish man, and they're coming into the throne and into the king's presence as a different people, as outsiders. And as we think about these things and as we piece this together, we can establish as we look behind the scenes that Esther is not who you would expect to become the next queen of Persia. She's got a different family dynamic, and she's a minority in the land. But still, she takes the bold step to move forward and to enter the beauty pageant. She's picked as the queen. She is elevated. Mordecai comes along with her. And in that, the underdog in Esther, the two underdogs here, they have stepped into a place of power. As they have stepped into this place of power, we begin to see kind of this plot unfold. And so it's kind of interesting where this first takes place, is that Mordecai is just hanging out, right? Hanging out in the palace, doing whatever Mordecai does in the palace in 5th century Persia. And he overhears two of the king's guards outside of the king's chambers plotting to kill the king. So he takes this to his cousin, Esther, and Esther is able to communicate this to King Xerxes. And King Xerxes does some, investigation, and it determines that, well, it is indeed true. There was a plot to kill him. And so at this point, he owes Mordecai big time. I mean, wouldn't you want to honor somebody who just gave you the plot about how you were about to be killed? Wouldn't you be a little bit appreciative of what they did for you? You would think that we know this king that throws these, crazy parties would honor Mordecai in this big way. But here in this moment, he doesn't really. He just kind of goes about his business and continues to do king things. And Mordecai kind of goes back and continues to do Mordecai things. And Esther remains in the palace as the queen. Here is kind of the next plot twist is that as one of the kind of second in command is Haman. And as we read about Haman, we see this picture of kind of the king's right hand as being this Amalekite descendant from King Agag, who was ordered, if you recall, about 400 or 500 years ago, as the Jewish people were entering into the promised land. God commands King Saul to take out the Amalekite people. And he commands them to completely annihilate them. But King Saul, he does that, but he leaves a few of them still alive. And so we see that over these many years that Haman is a descendant of the people that King Saul did not ultimately take out. And so clearly there is a little bit of beef here, that in one corner we have Mordecai, this Jewish man who is in a land that is a little bit different. And on the other hand, we have somebody that, they go way back. They threw down, a few hundred years earlier. And so you've got these two people that both have access to the king and have kind of an inroad to be able to communicate with the king. And we have established that, Mordecai saves the king's life, but is not quite celebrated. And then you see that Haman is here. And Haman and Mordecai don't exactly get along. So you've kind of got this feud here that is the undercurrent of everything. And this gets to a point that Haman just gets really mad because Mordecai does not bow down to Haman. See, Haman, I don't know what kind of Haman you imagine, but I kind of imagine like this bigger guy that has a beard and maybe kind of a scowl on his face, somebody who's just not very happy. Even after their first cup of coffee, they're still just angry throughout the day. And so you've got Haman here who is, second to the king. He demands the authority and the respect that of somebody in his position would deserve, and he expects that people will bow down to him. Well, Mordecai does not do that because, they beefed between their two people groups a long time ago, and so there's that tension there, and Mordecai does not respect Haman because God told King Saul that he was supposed to wipe out the Amalekite people, so there's this inherent disrespect that takes place there. This drives Haman nuts. And Haman decides, you know what? I'm not just going to wipe out Mordecai. I'm going to take out all of the Jewish people. I've had enough of his disrespect. You know what? We're going to throw some dice, we're going to cast lots, and we're just going to decide a day that we're going to take the Jews out. So that's what he does. He essentially rolls some dice, he casts lots. The Hebrew word for this is pure. That's going to be key here as we kind of make some of these links here in the book of Esther. But pure, so he casts lots and he decides that they're going to take out the Jewish people. And we're going to pick up here in verse 7 of chapter 3. So we'll be 7 through 13 here in Esther chapter 3. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, they cast the pure, that is the lot, in the presence of Haman to select the day and the month, and the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, there is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples in all provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of all other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them. And I will put 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury for men who carry out this business. So the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. Keep the money, the king said to Haman, and do with the people as you please. Then on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote out in the script of each province and in the language of each people all of Haman's orders to the king's satraps, the governors of the various provinces, and the nobles of the various peoples. These were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews, young and old, women and little children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. When I first kind of jumped into Esther, the first thing I recalled was the VeggieTales version of Esther. And going behind the scenes, this is a little bit deeper and a little bit more gruesome than the VeggieTales version of Esther. And to see that the king makes this decree to annihilate all the Jews, women, children, all the above, is kind of unsettling. But that's going to play a key role here in a little bit in how we see what God is doing behind the scenes here. So they, are sitting there as the Jewish people, and the king has issued this decree. He has issued this to all the people. All the people in the land have gotten an announcement that is, in a few months, here's your death day. In a few months, you're going to be annihilated. Orders of the king. And the Jewish people obviously are shaken. And while we may not necessarily have a death day on the calendar, what would it be like if the things that we are against, or the things that are against us, the things that we face in life, what would it be like if those things that challenge us, if those things that were against us, what would it be like if we were to put on the calendar that ultimately they would kill us? How does that feel each and every day, knowing that you're one day closer to the thing that's going to take you down? As a Jewish person, I couldn't imagine what it would be like living in those times, preparing for your ultimate fate, and for that to be that you and your family are destroyed. So Esther is put into this situation that we may not necessarily understand fully, but we can understand that when we face these circumstances in life, and when we kind of imagine that these things might overtake us, and I know that I often do, and I know that's a thing that can happen, is that we see things in a way that are irreversible, that are unchangeable, that are going to take us down, that are decreed or that are issued by somebody above us, by somebody that is around us, that are just said, that we believe, that we take to be irreversible and unchangeable. In the case of the Jews at this point, this is the case. He makes it a law. He writes a decree, sends it to all the people. In our lives, it may not necessarily be issued as a law or a decree, but we put ourselves in the same unimaginable change of taking place in our lives that Esther does. We face the same things that she faces, that no matter how we spin it, it seems like they're not going to change. The good news is this is not the end of the book of Esther. The good news is she continues to work, and that's exactly what she does, is she gets to work. Her and Mordecai, they begin to kind of go back and forth and to exchange some messages, and they're exchanging messages about, hey, this stinks. What are we going to do about it? And in doing so, they exchange several words just about how Esther is going to be put into a position to be able to help the Jewish people out, to help her people out. And it is we're going to pick up here in chapter 4, verses 12 through 14. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." So, they're exchanging kind of messages. They've got a eunuch that's taking messages back and forth from Esther to Mordecai. And Mordecai presents Esther with this idea, with this reality, that, you know what? Maybe the fact that you are here is not just because. It's not just happenstance. That you want a beauty pageant, and that you are here in the presence of the king as a Jewish woman. And she hasn't told the king at this point that she's a Jewish woman, so the king doesn't know that Esther is on the line, that the decree that he issued was against his wife, the queen who he selected. She's kept this kind of in her back pocket, information to herself. And so here she is. She's at this point. And Mordecai challenges her. He says, maybe, just maybe, you have a purpose in where you are at right now. And Esther has a decision. It's the same decision that we all face when we face the unimaginable circumstance, when we face the circumstance that seems unchangeable, that doesn't seem real. It's a chance to either just submit to the reality that is in front of her, to lay down and to give up, and to submit to death, to count down the days on the calendar, to mark them off and go, we're one day closer. We're going to give in. We're going to give up. Or she has the chance to go and to make a difference for her people, to fight on their behalf. After all, she is the queen. But it is not that easy. In their culture, for even Esther as the queen to approach the king would not have been a normal thing. For her to be able to go in front of the king, it would require the king to summon her. And at this point in time, because the king does not know that Esther is a Jew, well, Esther is now in a position that she can't just waltz in and say, hey, Xerxes, here's the thing. This can't happen. In fact, what she would be risking walking in front of the king without being summoned is death. For anybody to approach the king, to come before King Xerxes without being summoned, is punishable by death. Even Esther, the woman that he chose. So she's faced with this, and Mordecai has challenged her, and it's a tough situation, one that we all face, to either stand up and be bold and courageous in faith and go forward, or to lay down and quit. And this is how Esther responds. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Esther makes a decision in this moment that she's going to do what she can. She's heard the words of Mordecai, and she has decided to take a stand, and that she's going to go and be in front of the king and to try and make a change for her Jewish people. But before she does, she takes some time. She says in this set of scripture here, she says that, Mordecai, I need you to go and to gather all the Jewish people. I need you to gather my people, and I need you to fast. I need you to take some time to prepare on my behalf. And she says, not only am I going to do this, which I'm going to do before I go in front of the king, I'm asking the people around me to do this. Before she takes that bold step in faith, before she takes that courageous step in faith, Esther requires the community around her to participate in a spiritual practice that will help her in that moment. See, Esther is preparing herself for what is ahead in the current moment. She is helping herself understand what she is facing by taking time. And while God is not mentioned in this moment, and God is actually not mentioned at any point in the book of Esther, Esther is participating in a practice where she relinquishes her comfortability and her accessibility to food in order to better see that she cannot just rely on food alone, but that God, in the way that he fulfills us, in the food that is brought through him and through his word and through the time intentionally focusing on him, is important. She's preparing for battle ahead of time. She's doing so with her people. She is deciding the outcome of the situation, not alone, but with her people. She's taking time to recognize God. And we may not necessarily fast. It's something that I have done on occasions, and I'm sure many of you have also done on occasions, and it can be an incredible time to replace the comfortability of food, the accessibility of food, with intentional time with God. And even though we may not fast, we can see in the book of Esther that we can't do it alone, and that it requires the people around us to walk alongside us, to prepare us for the battles that we face each and every day. And that we do, regardless of the avenue or the method, need to spend intentional time preparing for those battles. For Esther, it is fasting, and she asked her community to fast with her. And fast she does, and as she continues, she goes through this process of fasting, and then she gets up the courage in chapter 7, verse 3, to go before the king. Chapter 7, verse 3, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request, for I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing. Esther said, an adversary, an enemy, this vile Haman. To give you a little bit of backstory into her approaching the king, right? So she approaches the king, she goes, she touches his scepter. The king does not kill her, thank goodness. And then she invites the king to this banquet, and she asks that Haman come along to this banquet. So the king and Haman come to this banquet, and Esther, wines and dines them for a little bit there. And after doing so, the king asked, hey, Esther, what is it that you want? I'll give you half the kingdom. And Esther says, well, I really want you to come back for a banquet tomorrow night. I don't know what it is about Persia, but they really like banquets. And so invites them back to a banquet the next night. As Haman is leaving this banquet, he sees Mordecai again, and obviously we know that after he has issued a decree to wipe out the Jews, he does not like Mordecai. So he sees Mordecai. Mordecai doesn't give him the respect that Haman believes that he deserves. So Haman, in a fit of rage, after the first banquet, goes home. He's talking to his people, and he says, you know what? I want you to build a stake. I want you to build a stake. I want you to build a gallows that are 70 feet high, 75 feet high, and we're just going to take this Mordecai dude out. In fact, I'm going to go talk to the king in the morning, and I'm going to tell the king that Mordecai is out of here. And as Haman wakes up, he's got this, this death device composed, and he is ready to go in front of the king. And clearly, we see that the king would probably side with Haman after he issued a decree to the entire country to kill the Jews, that he'd be okay with Haman killing Mordecai. And so he goes in front of the king, but what he does not know is that the king has had trouble sleeping the night before. And as a king would, he goes to the King's Chronicles and has one of his servants read him the stories that is a part of the kingdom and is part of his reign. And wildly enough, the story that he reads, if you'll recall, is the story about Mordecai letting him know the plan that was there to kill him. And in that moment, King Xerxes realizes, wow, I owe one to Mordecai. I didn't really celebrate him in the first place, and I owe one to the guy who helped me not die. And so he takes, the next morning, and he's sitting in his throne room doing king things. And as Haman enters in, he asks, who enters in? And Haman says, it's me. And he goes, hey, I got a question for you. How would you, basically handle somebody who needs to be honored? And Haman, in his self-righteous way, says, here's what I would do. I would put them on a horse. I would, take them on the king's nicest horse and the nicest clothes throughout the city, and I would give him the praise and the worthiness that he desires, and I would have the people of the city bow down to him for his great works. And what Haman doesn't realize is the guy that he built a stake for the night before is the one that the king is asking about. So the king says, here you go. Hey, Haman, I want you to take Mordecai through the city. And I want you to help lead him in the praise and the desire that he deserves for saving the king. He did this wonderful act. He saved my life. You're going to prance him around the city, and we're going to give him the honor that he deserves. And so it's kind of a funny moment here that Haman, who has built a stake in his backyard to kill Mordecai, is now prancing him around the city on the king's horse in the finest clothes and demanding that the people bow down to him. And this is where the story changes, and this is where that irreversible reality that we see being presented in Esther starts to change. And it's not just happenstance. Even though God is not mentioned, it is not without reason that King Xerxes is awake. It's not without reason that out of all the chronicles of his reign and of his time, he reads back to Mordecai and reads back to when Mordecai saved his life. But this is not where the story ends. They go back for the second night, and Esther is there, and this is when we hear her making this request that we just read, and Esther identifies that Haman is the adversary, that Haman is the one that needs to be taken out. And This makes the king mad, and there's a lot of angry people in this book. They walk away after parties really mad. You can kind of see this picture there, but they walk away mad, or the king walks away mad, and he comes, back, and Haman has stayed there, and he is pleading for his life with Esther, and Esther is sitting down, and it says that Esther and Haman were sitting together, and the king at that point just gets so mad at Haman that he says, you know what, that steak that is in your backyard that you were going to use to kill Mordecai, that's actually going to be for you. See, the enemy of the Jewish people that we read about in Haman, God takes care of. God takes care of the enemies, but it doesn't just end there. God takes care of Haman, and he's out of the way, and you would think that as Mordecai has been elevated to this position of authority and power, and that he has been given, this majestic walk through the city, that it would be as simple as him getting the king's signet, taking the ring, and writing a new decree, now that Haman is out of the way, to those people saying, you know what, it is reversed. We're not going to be killing Jews in a few months. That death day, you know what, that was an accident. Turns out that guy is not working for the king anymore. We're going to, cancel that. What they came to find is that the king could not overturn a decree. And so the story doesn't end as simply as overturning the decree and everybody living happily ever after. In fact, this is where the behind the scenes part does begin or continues to be a little bit gruesome, is that after they go to the king, he says, you know what, I can't overturn a decree, but I can issue a new decree. So he does. He issues a decree that Haman, that whole thing with him killing the Jews and the people rising up against the Jews, right? He did that. But then Mordecai comes in. He's at this position of power. He issues a new decree that the Jewish people will be able to defend themselves from anybody who attacks them. So God has removed the enemy of Haman, but he has not removed the impending enemy of the decree that Haman established. Would have been a whole lot easier to just take a new decree and do it. And at this point, the story turns again, and you see this imminent danger and this imminent threat of battle between the Jewish people and their adversaries, and they're clearly outnumbered. We've established that a lot of the Jewish people are back in Jerusalem. They're clearly a minority in the area. But we get to that day, and what we see in the book of Esther is that God delivers the Jewish people. In fact, it talks about in gruesome detail that all of Haman's family was killed. And it talks about how many of the Persian people were destroyed. And in fact, they go one more day past the day that was decreed, and they completely destroy the enemy that they were facing. And as we look to the story of Esther, and as we look behind the scenes, there are a lot of big twists. There are a lot of big turns. But there is also a big constant, and that is God. And while he is not mentioned, as you peel back the layers and you start to see from the moment that Vashti says no, to the moment that Esther enters the beauty pageant, to Mordecai being in the exact right place at the right time, to the king not being able to sleep, to Esther being able to have the wisdom and the courage and the bold faith to step forward in front of the king, even though it meant death and not being killed. God is working in and through his people. And oftentimes we look in the Bible and we look to our characters as a moral example. We look to our characters as people that are good people that God has used, but there are also people that God just uses regardless of their status. And Esther is one of those people. She's a woman in 5th century Persia who is a Jew who, quite frankly, has also breached a lot of the rules that are set forth for the Jewish people in the Torah. She, in most ways, is disqualified, or not somebody that we would pick to be the one to deliver the Jews. Not somebody that you would think, looking at the history books, that would bring deliverance for the Jews. But God clearly establishes in this, while he is not mentioned, that God is going to use his people. And Esther and Mordecai are two of those people that he uses. And in our life, God can use us. regardless of what you have done, regardless of who you are, regardless of your status, God can use you. And that's an easy statement that we often say in church, but the reality, much like Esther, is we may not necessarily see God working in our lives. We may not necessarily see that at the forefront, but the reality is that God is working. And that when God seems absent, he is working behind the scenes. Esther is a testament to how God is working behind the scenes. It's clearly established in the book of Esther. And while he's never mentioned, we know that he is working behind the scenes. And the same goes for you and for me today. That when we don't realize it, and when it seems as though God is absent, God is working behind the scenes. No matter how bad things look, God is redeeming his people. God is redeeming his people. And you may think that you're facing an irreversible circumstance. You may think that it's all over and that all hope is lost. It certainly seemed that way for Esther. But the reality is that God is working beneath the surface. Philippians 2:13 says, "For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose." You see, it's not just Esther doing these things. God is working in and through Esther's life. Even though she is exempt from the position by a lot of qualifications that you and I would consider standards for her to be able to be in this position, God is working in and through her life. And where we feel the same way that we are not qualified because of our status, because of our age, because of our position, because of you name it, God is working in and through our lives. And we know that he can work in and through our lives. And even when we don't see it, God is working in and through our lives. But God doesn't just demand us to do this, right? God is sovereign, and we know that his authority and his power is over all things, that is in all things, and it is through all things. But God is sovereign over his sovereignty, and God gives us the choice to align with his will. See, God does not demand that we follow his will. It would have been very easy in this narrative of Esther to read that God commanded Esther to do these things and did not give her a choice. That God placed her in this position and said, Esther, you're going to be the deliverance for the Jews. Esther, you're going to be the one that sacrifices potentially your life, that you put your life on the line for the well-being of your people, and I'm going to make sure. But God gave Esther the choice. And Esther says, in a bold and courageous faith, if I must perish, I must perish. See, God that is working in and through our lives doesn't mean that he's going to make life easy. It doesn't mean that he is going to take all of our enemies out of our lives. It does not mean that he is going to rewrite the narrative and that he is going to impose this just happy-go-lucky relationship with him. He allowed Esther to be in the position that she was and fulfilled her as the person to be in that spot. And then he walked through that with her. While it's not mentioned, he walked through that with her. And in our lives too, we often think that we can just rely